COVID-19 has given us many things: death, despair, job loss, maddening isolation, and the inconvenient existential reminder that us humans are not all that. But it has also given us cleaner air and water, and perhaps a better appreciation for our planet. But is this enough? Will the tragic economic slowdown and rife human distress of this pandemic make a lasting environmental impact? Probably not. Stay tuned to find out why and what you can do about it. The climate crisis and COVID-19 crisis may seem difficult to compare, but they are in fact linked in many ways. The international response to the corona pandemic has been rapid and dramatic. Governments have listened to the advice of scientists and responded by implementing appropriate changes to our daily lives. However, we have seen decades of inaction and disregard for scientific advice on the climate crisis. These are both threats to our individual lives and longevity as a species. However, the drastic contrast in response to these different crises reveals the priorities of the world's governments. The problem is that most of us can easily grasp the immediate threat of a virus. We can understand how its spread can affect our lives and the small steps we can take to stop it. However, climate change is more difficult to understand. It is difficult to see the direct impact of human activity and of individual actions. Therefore, many people feel like the impacts of climate change are decades away and that their actions would not have enough impact. But the climate crisis is already affecting our lives. This is mostly in developing nations, but like a pandemic, it will spread. Climate change is like a disease on our planet, and perhaps if the media treated it as such, governments and the public might take it more seriously. Rob Jackson from Global Carbon Project and Stanford University estimates that 2020 could see a 5% reduction in global CO2 emissions, the first dip since a 1.4% reduction after the 2008 financial crisis, and the largest dip since World War II. In China and Italy, satellite images show that the industrial slowdown and reduction in traffic has resulted in a dramatic drop in nitrogen dioxide levels by 30 and 50% respectively. Additionally, with the grounding of aircraft and extreme restrictions on travel, the global air quality has increased considerably, with an 11.4% improvement in China alone. In fact, if this high air quality lasted only 2 months, it would prevent 53 to 77,000 premature deaths in China due to air pollution-related diseases, saving 20 times more lives than are likely to be lost due to the virus. All of this coincides with the drastic slowdown of industry and a reduction in fossil fuel burning. The positive environmental and health impacts of this industrial respite are remarkable and shows us that there is still time for ecosystems to recover. However, environmental progress at the cost of human suffering is not a sustainable solution. Only an immediate and existential threat like a global pandemic could have led to such a profound change. At the time of writing, global deaths from COVID-19 have passed 200,000, with more than 3 million cases confirmed worldwide. As well as the emotional toll of early deaths, the pandemic has brought widespread job losses and threatened the livelihoods of millions as businesses struggle to cope with the restrictions being put in place. It has been estimated that job losses to date total 1 million in Britain, 4 million in France, 5 million in Wuhan, China, and 10 million in the US. Economic activity has stalled and stock markets have tumbled alongside the falling carbon emissions. This is likely to lead to an economic depression similar to that of the 2008 financial crash, further widening the economic and social inequality gap. This is precisely the opposite of the drive towards a decarbonised, sustainable economy that many have been advocating for decades. It is for these reasons that the positive environmental impacts of COVID-19 are likely very short-lived. Industries and governments will be looking to return to business as usual once the pandemic has passed, resulting in an emissions surge. Our response to the crisis shows, without a doubt, that strong governments have ample financial, structural and political ability to tackle major pandemics. So what's stopping them from tackling the much more threatening pandemic of climate change? In this current era, our political and economic system is built on the philosophy of Neoliberalism. This individual-focused way of thought has made our world a very self-serving, egocentric place, from business and industry down to shallow personal consumerism. Consider subscribing if you'd be interested in a video on neoliberalism and its link to the lack of climate action. The heartwarming global support of healthcare workers and other key professions that are keeping our society running shows that we're compassionate and willing to work together as a community to make decisions and actions that benefit the society as well as the individual. In fact, switching to a more considerate and collective mindset is also the only effective option for tackling the problem of climate change. People have been found to react much more strongly to immediate personal danger, no matter how small, than they do to future dangers which may threaten their entire way of life. As no one can say with certainty exactly how climate change will affect you as an individual, this redundant piece of evolutionary psychology is hampering our response to climate change. However, we do know with absolute certainty that unless we stop acting as individual stakeholders and act as a collective force, societies across the globe will suffer social and economic loss due to environmental factors. The COVID-19 pandemic will pass in time, leaving historical scars. It gives us a unique opportunity to make the political changes needed to move society into a more economically fair and ecologically rich system. However, we must stay vigilant, as this is unlikely to occur without your help. Once the pandemic is over, it is desirable for the current economic powers to return to business as usual. In fact, in order to keep economies afloat, there is a risk that governments may reduce environmental standards to squeeze out more financial activity. We are already seeing this happen in China and the US, where they are preparing to recover for economic losses at any cost. The 2008 financial crash resulted in a 1.4% drop in global emissions. However, instead of funding more sustainable economic models, governments decided to maintain the status quo by bailing out the banks and supporting the source of the economic crash. This resulted in an emissions surge in 2010, leading to an all-time high. In Europe and the US, companies are already demanding emergency funds due to lockdown, reducing their activity. Which companies the governments decide to support will determine the direction our society will move in after this pandemic. Currently, aviation, automotive and fossil fuel industries are strongly lobbying governments for financial support due to the lockdown, and they are likely to win. These companies are causing the climate crisis and will continue to do so if we make the same mistakes we did in 2008. Instead, we should invest this money into creating a fair carbon tax that reflects the environmental cost of emissions and incentivises companies to find less polluting ways of maintaining their operation. It is no secret that what we need is a profound systematic shift to a more sustainable economy that works for both people and the planet. The EU Green Deal and the US Green New Deal are reasonable roadmaps to a resilient economic model within the planet's natural boundaries. These political roadmaps are ready to be implemented, but need public support before governments will adopt them. Therefore, you can help your community post-COVID-19 by voting responsibly at your next local elections. Read into your candidates' manifestos to see exactly how they plan to move to a fair, green and sustainable economy. Consider doing it as a group, splitting up the workload with friends and colleagues, then sharing that information over lunch or a Friday pint. COVID-19 is not the first pandemic humanity has faced, and it will not be the last. Some of you might be wondering how viruses like this come to exist and spread through a population, or if there is anything we can do or stop doing to reduce the severity of the next pandemic. We will explore this topic in part 2 of this series, so please like, comment and subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of the next instalment. Please also check out our other social media, and as always, look after yourselves, each other, and most importantly, the planet around you. Thanks again, OurEden.